This is my 31st video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also, see my lengthy series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part is the 5th dealing with my 3rd layout, my 2nd OO gauge layout, to be made using mainly Hornby set track. See the prior video, part 27, for my reasons for wanting to try a Hornby set track layout when I already had an OO gauge layout using Bachmann Easy Track. This part deals with further work on my Hornby layout, making proper wooden supports for the board, putting up a backscene, laying out roads and building positions, etc. So, at the end of my last video, I'd done some basic testing and debugging as far as I could of the Hornby electric turntable, and I had Cork laid out, together with a paper template of how my station was supposed to go, with a view to designing some roads in the centre part of the layout. I took that picture of the layout, which I'd tried to take showing the centre from as close to a vertical position as I could manage, and sketched in a basic road layout using a graphics program on my PC, as seen in the grey lines on the Cork here. Those aren't actually drawn on the Cork at this point, they're just overlaid on the image in a PC graphics program. Given that basic idea, I proceeded to draw roads on the actual Cork. As I figured I'd never be able to make a neat job of drawing roads freehand, I used a metal ruler for the straight edges and chose 2 different bowls from my kitchen to make outside and inside radii for the curves. As you may see, I've somewhat modified the basic design done on the computer, putting in a slanted section to the right of the level crossing in order to be able to get the road on the right over closer to what is intended to be a yard area around the turntable. The road goes close to, but not right up to, the station building template, as obviously there should be some space between the doors of the station building and the road where vehicles are driving. Here's a view of the whole board at this point in the process. Next, I wanted to mark the positions of the tracks, but I didn't want the tracks to shift as I was doing this, so I decided I'd better put in a few track pins just on a temporary basis to stop the track moving aside as I tried to draw around it. I put in some Pico SL14 track pins, not trying to drive them right in. I found it very difficult to get the pins to go into the MDF I used for my board, a problem that was to be ongoing through the next few processes. That MDF is tough stuff. As I say, these pins weren't intended to hold the track down, just to stop it moving aside as I marked the track positions for now. I removed the Cork at this point in order to cut it to the required shapes. At this point I also drew round both sides of all of the tracks with a black marker to establish the track positions. And here are the 2 main Cork sections back on the board after cutting, which I did with a mixture of scissors and knife. It's easier in a way to cut the Cork using scissors, but that really doesn't work for tricky interior shapes. I set up some paper templates for additional items. The 2 small rectangular templates beside the station and beside the level crossing are for signal boxes. I've ordered a Hornby plastic box and a Metcalf kit that I haven't used before for the other box. The larger numbered templates are for some gentle foam hills to add a bit of contour to the layout. I've added a template for foam in the bottom left corner by the control position and another between the outer sidings and the main loop lines. And on the right of the layout I've added templates for foam in both corners. Now I've lifted all of the track, including the turntable. You can see that I've marked all of the track positions except for the area covered by the Cork at the front of the board. And now I've taken off all of the Cork and the templates as well, and all that is left on the board is the black marker indicating the track positions except for the part where the Cork went. These markings are basically to indicate where I need to lay the track bed. Now I wanted to actually lift the board so that I could build a more permanent wooden frame to support it, as it was just resting on top of boxes at the moment. I screwed a piece of framing lumber to the wall to support the end of the board as I lifted it and leant it back. This was my design for the supporting frame done on my PC. I'm not much of a carpenter. I was taught how to do fancy things like dovetail joints back in woodwork in school 50 years ago, but basically anything I actually do is generally pretty crude, especially if there's no need for it to look good. My plan here was simply to cut legs from 2x4 and then lay lengths of 2x2 from one 2x4 leg to the other, simply laying the 2x2s on top of the 2x4 legs and screwing them down. A frame made like this would have been wobbly without additional bracing, but given the position I was putting the board in, I could screw all of the legs except the bottom left one directly into the walls, and I figured that should provide support quite rigid enough. Spoiler alert, this basically worked out okay, but the lengths of 2x2 along the long sides of the board did tend to bend and allow the board to sag just a little in the middle, so I ended up eventually adding 2 more legs in the middle of the 2 long sides. As you may see, I've marked on this diagram the lengths to which I need to cut the 2x2 framing pieces. The 2x4 legs were all made 26 inches long in order to fit the board low enough under the window at the end to allow for the 15-inch high backscene. And now the board is lifted and leant back, and I have put in the back part of the frame, with the 3 2x4 legs screwed to the walls and 2x2 pieces laid across the tops of those legs and screwed down. Now I mounted the backscene. As usual, this proved to be a problem. I thought I was getting the premium version of the ID backscene printed on vinyl with a peel-off backing, similar to the 24-inch backscene that I used for my Bachmann EasyTrack OO gauge layout. But it turned out that what I got delivered this time was just the non-premium version printed on paper, making it much weaker and leaving you to your own devices as to mounting it. I have to admit I've had nothing but problems mounting backscenes. It's a tricky task. I first tried spreading glue over the back of a backscene and gluing it down that way. Well, perhaps that would work with some types of backscene and some types of glue, but I got lots of wrinkling and bubbling and the result wasn't really at all satisfactory. This was the first try for my N-gauge layout. The instructions that came with this backscene specifically advised against trying to glue it down with wallpaper paste or PVA or any other kind of water-based glue, as these would tend to cause the paper to distort and wrinkle. The backscenes with peel-off backing aren't easy either. At least you don't have any problems with the glue distorting the scene, but it's very tricky to peel off the backing and smooth the scene down evenly, and once it starts to stick you really can't move it. In this case I opted to use double-sided tape. The instructions suggested this as an option, and it happened that I had some heavy-duty double-sided tape on hand from a previous project. This worked up to a point, but this paper backscene was so weak that once stuck down on the double-sided tape it couldn't be moved at all without tearing it, which made getting the long sections even very difficult, and as you can see I didn't really succeed. I got the scene started at the left on a slight downward angle, so it ended up too low at the right-hand end. Anyway, this was the best I could do. On balance, I do think the double-sided tape method is probably the best of those I've tried, even if I didn't succeed too well with my first attempt using it in this case. Once the backscene was in place, as best as I could do it, I completed the front part of the frame by connecting the legs screwed to the walls to a freestanding front left corner leg. You can see clearly here how I simply laid the 2x2s down on top of the 2x4 legs and screwed them down. And then I tipped the board back onto the frame. Not the easiest thing to do, as the board is large and awkward and really heavy. 3/16" MDF weighs a lot. As some white was showing at the bottom of the backscene, I tried to colour it with green marker. This only worked up to a point, as the board moved down more as things settled. It helped somewhat when I added the extra legs in the middle, stopping the centre of the board from sagging. Here you can see I've laid the cut-out cork back down, getting ready to stick it down. I sanded the edges of the Cork road sections a bit to try to give them more of an even camber rather than just having sharp edges. However, I wanted the cork to have sharp edges where it was meeting another section of cork or meeting foam track bed. I stuck the cork down with PVA glue and weighted it with books while the glue dried. Meanwhile, I cut out pieces of white foam to the shape of my templates for the raised areas. I did this using the cheap heated foam cutter that I bought off Amazon for my Backman 00 layout project. I had been thinking about more buildings for this layout, and I decided that I'd have an engine shed on the end of the outer sidings and a goods shed on the end of one of the inner sidings. I decided to use the Metcalfe kits, as I could get those locally from British Model Trains in Cambridge, Ontario, and it seemed they would produce results as good as most of the other options, all of which would be much more expensive for me, e.g. buying Hornby Scaledale or Bachmann Scenecraft items from the UK. I printed templates for the Metcalfe buildings based on the images supplied by Metcalfe in order to determine how things would fit. The Metcalfe double road engine shed is a large building, and that's the template at top left here. It also comes with a small workshop building, and I really didn't have room for that near the engine shed, and so I proposed to locate the workshop as seen at top right here, just going off the image in the top right, on the far side of the goods shed. I did need to reduce the size of the raised foam area 4 a bit in order to accommodate the Metcalfe shed. Here are the foam pieces for the raised areas in the far corners. I will try to shape them into more gentle contours, and then they'll be painted and treated with static grass. And eventually they'll likely get additional trees or other vegetation. Here I've done some work shaping the foam pieces more using the hot wire cutting tool. And here are the other two pieces after that shaping. This is the area where the Metcalfe goods shed is intended to go. The goods shed kit comes with a weighbridge and a weighbridge office, and there's also a workshop that comes with the engine shed kit. I figured there should basically be road extensions to allow for driving across the weighbridge and up to the goods shed, so I thought that I would add cork under this whole area. I made a paper template for a cork extension. I had quite a bit of cork left from the two 2-foot by 3-foot sheets that I had bought. Here I've cut additional cork pieces for the goods shed area and also to go under the engine shed and under the two sets of points that didn't already have cork under them, or only partially so in one case. I glued all of the cork pieces down and then used spackling to fill in the gaps where the pieces joined and create smoother transitions. And this is where the stub from the level crossing joins the centre circling road. I've used some spackling to make that join smoother. So that's sort of the plan for now. Cork under all of the junction areas and the sheds and their surrounds, and small raised areas here and there. The main station will have platforms along the back straights with its building coming down to the road, but those templates are not in place in this picture. At this point I painted all of the cork with some dark grey latex paint that I bought for the purpose. I also used some light grey latex paint left over from my Bachmann layout to paint the yard area where the turntable is to go. And I think perhaps I'll leave it at this point for this video. Next up we'll be laying foam track bed for the track areas not addressed by the cork, and then laying the track itself back down on a more permanent basis and completing the wiring, and then ballasting, grassing, etc.